There is a moment in every life when silence becomes unbearable. A pause, stretched thin like old fabric, where the mind gnaws on itself and the heart whispers questions no one wants to hear. What does it mean to choose? And when you do, when you lean toward good or tip into evil, what debt comes due in the secret courtroom of your own soul? Stephen King once wrote that the place where you made your stand never mattered, only that you were there and still on your feet. But what if that stand comes with a cost too heavy to bear? What if choosing wrongly doesn't destroy the world outside you, but corrodes the world within? Fear does not always announce itself as panic or terror. Sometimes it enters quietly, disguised as hesitation, dressed up as the need for more time. In the stand, fear infected humanity as swiftly as any plague. It didn't just spread through coughing mouths and trembling hands. It slipped between neighbors, families, strangers, turning survival into a currency, forcing men and women to measure their worth by who they abandoned. It is in this crucible that choice emerges, good or evil, mercy or cruelty, silence or action. The tragedy is that society often applauds those who look away, who choose safety over confrontation, who refuse to pay the price of integrity. And yet, that applause is hollow. The evil still lingers, and the bill always comes due. To understand the psychology of choice is to descend into the dim hallways of human conscience, where every shadow whispers a justification. A man kills not because he wakes with the desire to spill blood, but because fear and pride twist around his ribs until he can no longer distinguish self-preservation from cruelty. A woman betrays her friend not because she despises her, but because the taste of survival is sweeter than the bitterness of loyalty. This is the hidden logic of the mistake. People tell themselves it is small, temporary, justifiable, but every mistake grows teeth. It waits in the corners of memory, chewing at the fragile scaffolding of self-respect. And what begins as one mistake becomes a life bent under its weight. What King saw, and what modern society still refuses to admit, is that good and evil are not opposite poles, but mirrors reflecting the same face. The kind neighbor, under hunger and despair, becomes the looter. The kind-hearted mother, when cornered, chooses betrayal to protect her children. Evil is not some foreign invader. It is the natural shape of fear when morality is too fragile to contain it. And goodness? It is not gentle, not safe. Goodness is brutal in its demands. To be good is to carry the unbearable, to risk ridicule, to be scarred by sacrifice. Both paths exact a price. One devours you from the outside, the other from within. Think of the figures who rose in the stand when civilization burned to ash. On one side, Randall Flagg, whispering promises of order through the architecture of cruelty, seducing the broken-hearted with the lie that obedience is strength. On the other side, those who staggered toward Mother Abigail, uncertain, trembling, yet unwilling to surrender the last flicker of conscience. Both choices looked impossible. To stand with good meant facing endless loss, a future with no guarantee except suffering. To stand with evil meant an easier path, security, power, the illusion of control. But beneath each was the same truth. You would never be free of the price you paid. The only question was whether you would carry the pain of sacrifice or the poison of complicity. And what of the mistakes, the countless choices where a character chose wrong? then woke each morning with that decision sitting at the edge of the bed. The criminal psychology of a mistake is not about the act itself, but the aftermath. People believe a mistake can be buried, but guilt is not soil, and memory is not the grave. A mistake breathes. It sits with you during meals, leans against you as you lie awake at night, stares at you in the reflection of a window. Some try to numb it with justifications, with the chorus of, "I had no choice." Others let it grow into rage, turning self-hatred outward so that the entire world becomes their enemy. But there is no escape from that courtroom inside the mind. The gavel falls again and again, sentencing you each time to live with what you did not resist. Modern society pretends these choices belong to the past. We sit in climate-controlled rooms, scrolling through disasters like they are distant nightmares. Yet every day presents the same test King described in The Wasteland of the Stand. Do you choose convenience over compassion? Do you allow cruelty to happen in silence because raising your voice costs too much? Do you let fear dictate your morality, telling yourself it is temporary, that it isn't your responsibility, that someone else will pay the price? But no choice is free. If you choose to look away, you pay with your integrity. If you choose to act, you pay with your comfort. And when society at large favors silence, the result is a collective rot, evil woven into the fabric of everyday life, so ordinary it looks invisible. The struggle is not whether evil exists. It always has, always will. The struggle is whether we allow ourselves to be molded by it. Every person walks with an inner jury, half good, half cruel, and the verdict shifts depending on the pressures applied. Society loves to point to monsters, to label them as other, as though cruelty is foreign, as though evil wears a clear mask. But the most frightening truth is this: evil wears your face. It speaks in your voice. It whispers, not in a language of horror, but in the reasonable tones of safety, convenience, survival. And when you listen, when you obey, it asks for nothing but your silence. And so the question becomes, what price are you willing to pay? To choose good is to bleed, to lose, to suffer. To choose evil is to erode piece by piece until the person in the mirror is a stranger. Both demand sacrifice, both tear at your humanity, but only one keeps the possibility of redemption alive. Only one lets you rise, scarred but standing, even when the world itself has crumbled. Would you rather bear wounds that heal into strength, or live unmarked on the outside, while rotting alive within? Evil does not appear in our lives as a snarling beast. It often enters as a whisper, an excuse, a justification, a way out that feels safe when the walls are closing in. That is its genius. Randall Flagg in The Stand was not terrifying because of his supernatural powers, but because he understood this psychology too well. He knew that most people don't leap into evil with open arms. They slide into it, one rationalization at a time. They say, I will do this small wrong to survive, or I will stay silent just this once, or I will turn away because the burden isn't mine. Flagg's power was in giving those choices a voice that sounded like liberation. He fed off the parts of humanity that wanted to be free of guilt, free of pain, free of responsibility. But freedom without responsibility is not freedom. It's surrender. The criminal mind, in truth, is rarely monstrous in its beginning. It is fragile. It is afraid. It is cornered by circumstances, or feels itself cornered. And in that tight space, Morality looks like a luxury one cannot afford. This is where mistakes are born, not in the desire for destruction, but in the refusal to bear suffering. But once a person crosses that line, the mind begins its own contortions to survive the knowledge of what it has done. That is where justification blooms into delusion, and delusion hardens into cruelty. Each act becomes easier, because the first one demanded the highest price. After the first betrayal, the heart already knows it can be corrupted. King's great cruelty as a storyteller is that he does not allow his characters, or his readers, the easy comfort of blaming someone else. He shows us that the evil we fear most is not a demon, not a stranger, but ourselves under the right conditions. A soldier, terrified of dying, shoots an innocent man and calls it strategy. A parent, desperate to protect their children, destroys another family and calls it survival. These are not alien horrors. They are reflections of us. The line between good and evil is not a border outside. It is a fracture running down the center of every human soul. To choose good, then, is not to choose safety. It is to choose pain with open eyes. Goodness in the Stand required characters to walk into uncertainty, to suffer hunger, grief, loss, and still not surrender to the seduction of Flag's order. Goodness is defiance against the grain of human instinct. It is not rewarded quickly, nor is it glamorous. It is ugly, bloody, exhausting, and yet it is the only path that leaves the conscience intact. The choice for good is not about the world outside, it is about the world inside. Because when you give up that fight, when you choose cruelty or apathy, you may survive the day, but you do not survive yourself. What happens to a society that forgets this? It fractures, it decays, it begins to worship strength without morality, efficiency without compassion. It crowns men like Flag, who promise structure and discipline, because chaos feels unbearable. It silences the weak because their cries make others uncomfortable. It calls betrayal practicality, cowardice, realism, and soon, no one remembers when they stopped being human. They only know that they are still breathing, and they tell themselves that is enough. But survival without soul is not survival. It is a long, drawn-out burial. Consider the psychology of those who walked with Mother Abigail. They were not saints. They doubted. They faltered. They argued. But they were united by something more difficult than fear. Responsibility. Responsibility, not just for themselves, but for one another. For the fragile thread of humanity still worth saving. To accept responsibility is to accept suffering, because compassion is always costly. It asks you to carry burdens that are not your own, to bleed for wounds you did not receive. But this is the only kind of suffering that preserves meaning. The other kind, the suffering of regret, of complicity, of silence, is endless. It eats you alive because it is suffering without purpose. Every reader of King's work is forced to confront the same mirror. We are asked, quietly but insistently, what would you do? Would you walk toward the uncertain light, risking everything? Or would you take the easy road to Flag's camp, convincing yourself you had no choice? The answer is not theoretical. It is written in the choices we make each day. When we witness cruelty and say nothing. When we see oppression and justify it as not our problem. When we hurt another because we are tired, afraid, or desperate. Each moment is a rehearsal for the apocalypse. Each silence a small pledge to the darkness. And still, the possibility of redemption lingers. That is the hope buried beneath King's bleakest visions. A mistake does not have to define you, though it will always scar you. You can choose again and again and again. Each choice is another price, another sacrifice. You will lose comfort. You will lose safety. But you will keep your soul. That is the only wealth worth guarding when the world burns. Because at the end of every story, after the plague has run its course, after the fires have smothered themselves into ash, what remains is not who survived, but how they survived. Did they carry their humanity like a torch, battered but still burning? Or did they trade it away for one more breath, one more day, one more illusion of safety? That is the true measure of good and evil, not what happens to the world, but what happens inside you when the choice comes. And so the haunting question lingers. When that choice comes for you, not in some apocalyptic wasteland, but in the quiet moments of daily life, what price will you pay? The weight of choice is not always dramatic. Sometimes it comes in silence, in the moments when no one is watching. That is the cruel paradox. Our greatest moral battles rarely happen in the open. They unfold in secret, in the space between thought and action, where temptation gnaws and conscience whispers like a dying flame. When King wrote The Stand, he dressed this struggle in apocalyptic ruins and demonic figures. But the core was always human psychology, the ceaseless war inside each person between self-preservation and moral duty. Strip away the plague, the supernatural, the deserts of Nevada, and you find the same story written into every ordinary life. Criminal psychology teaches us that mistakes are not accidents of fate. They are rehearsals of desire and fear. A man does not embezzle millions because the opportunity appeared overnight. He begins with the smallest theft, time from an employer, a lie to a friend, a corner cut when no one notices. Each small act lowers the threshold, reshaping his identity until crime feels natural, inevitable. In the same way, betrayal in The Stand did not appear fully formed. It was built through small silences. Through each time, a character said, "I cannot bear this responsibility," and shifted their pain onto another. Evil thrives in increments, and each increment feels excusable. That is why it spreads so easily. It wears the disguise of survival. But goodness works in increments too. It begins not with grand gestures, but with the refusal to yield to the whisper. It begins with saying no when every part of you wants to say yes. It is in the act of speaking when silence is safer, in staying when running is easier. Each choice in favor of good strengthens the fragile architecture of conscience. Brick by brick, it hurts, it isolates, it rarely brings applause. But it builds something far sturdier than survival. It builds a soul that does not fracture when the world demands compromise. Yet we must be honest. The price of choosing good is brutal. Characters who clung to goodness in The Stand paid with hunger, loneliness, exhaustion, grief, and in real life. Those who resist cruelty often pay with alienation, ridicule, or the loss of stability. Society does not reward those who break silence. It punishes them. Whistleblowers are exiled. Truth-tellers are mocked. The compassionate are drained until their own resources crumble. This is why so many choose evil without ever calling it by its name. They rename it common sense, realism, self-interest. They treat goodness as a luxury for those who can afford it. But the truth is harsher. Goodness is not a luxury. It is the last defense against a world that would turn us into shadows of ourselves. The psychology of regret is perhaps the cruelest weight of all. A mistake haunts because it cannot be undone. You may explain it away, bury it, even distract yourself with new ambitions, but it remains, patient, like a nail driven into the wood of your soul. Every glance at it reminds you of who you could have been, had you chosen differently. Regret is not punishment from the outside, it is the self devouring itself. The men and women who walked with Flag in King's novel were not free, even in their power. They carried a sickness more corrosive than Captain Tripp's, the knowledge that they had sold their humanity for safety. And no victory can heal that wound. But here lies the terrifying beauty of human existence. Each new day demands another choice, even when you have chosen wrong, even when guilt stains your hands. The battle is not over. Redemption, though costly, is never fully out of reach. To turn back toward good is to walk into fire, to burn away layers of self-deception, to endure the judgment of others, and worse, the judgment of your own heart. Yet this fire is cleansing. It does not erase the scar, but it prevents the scar from spreading like rot. To choose again is to admit, I was weak, I was afraid, I was wrong, but I will not let that be the whole of me. And so we return to the central question. What does it mean to pay the price? It means carrying wounds that others will never see. It means suffering losses that others will never understand. It means facing nights where sleep abandons you because your conscience will not be silent. But it also means refusing to surrender your humanity. It means standing, even when trembling. It means believing, against all reason, that good is worth the pain it demands. The Stand is a story about the end of the world. But in truth, it is a story about the end of illusions. When everything falls away, society, order, convenience, what remains is the raw self, stripped of excuses. And in that self lies the only real question that matters. Will you choose to protect your humanity or to destroy it for the sake of survival? Because the world may end in fire, in plague, in silence, but the soul ends in choice. And that is where I leave you, with a question meant not for comfort, but for unease. When the choice rises before you, as it does every day in small ways, when the whisper of evil sounds easier than the cry of conscience, what will you choose? Good and evil do not live in different kingdoms. They live in the same room, sharing the same air, feeding from the same table. They are not absolute forces tearing the world apart from opposite corners. They are brothers, bound together, warring inside the same chest. And every time we breathe, every time we act, one grows stronger while the other withers. That is the unbearable truth King pressed against us in The Stand. We are both savior and destroyer, and every decision is a coin tossed between light and shadow. What makes this struggle so excruciating is not the clarity of good versus evil, but the gray blur between them. Survival feels like a command written in our bones. It is the primal voice that has carried humanity across deserts, wars, and plagues. And yet, morality whispers something softer, less certain. Do not become the thing you fear. Survival tells us to kill the stranger before he kills us. Morality asks us to look into his eyes and see a reflection of ourselves. Which voice wins? Which voice should win? The answer is never clean. It is never safe. Think of how ordinary people in King's world became monsters without even realizing it. A townsperson, exhausted by grief, sides with Flag, because he promises order. Another betrays a companion because the journey toward Mother Abigail feels too long, too pointless. These are not villains in the way we imagine villains. They are us, broken, weary, desperate. And that is what makes their fall so chilling. They did not wake up craving evil. They simply refused to pay the price goodness demanded. They chose the cheaper road, the quicker relief. But every shortcut has a toll hidden at the end. Criminal psychology calls this cognitive dissonance, the war between what we know is right and what we allow ourselves to do. The mind cannot stand in that war forever. It seeks peace, even if the peace is built on lies. And so we rewrite our choices. Betrayal becomes strategy. Cruelty becomes justice. Silence becomes wisdom. But these are not truths. They are masks, and masks, no matter how convincing, eventually rot against the skin. That rot is what King captured. The corruption not of societies or governments, but of the individual soul when it can no longer bear its own reflection. Goodness, in contrast, is merciless in its honesty. It does not allow the mind to hide. It drags you forward, stripped of excuses, into the blinding weight of responsibility. To choose good is to suffer deliberately, to embrace losses no one else will applaud, to carry burdens that break your back. In the stand, goodness was not a shining hero with a sword. It was ragged wanderers stumbling across wastelands, clinging to one another because they refused to abandon the fragile miracle of human decency. They did not look victorious. They looked broken. But broken in the light is still stronger than whole in the dark. This is the paradox society refuses to admit. Evil often looks stronger, more organized, more appealing. It offers certainty where good offers doubt. It offers power where good offers sacrifice. But that certainty is fragile, and that power is hollow. It collapses under its own weight, because evil cannot sustain itself without devouring those who serve it. That is the ultimate price of evil. You do not simply pay once. You pay again and again until there is nothing left to give. And so the lesson burns. Every act of good will scar you, but every act of evil will hollow you. You must decide which wound you can live with. Would you rather limp through life scarred, yet still capable of seeing yourself in the mirror? Or would you rather stride unbroken, only to realize one day that the person in the reflection has vanished? The stand is not about the plague. It is about the plague we carry inside, the infection of excuses, the fever of fear, the slow death of conscience. And that infection is not fantasy. It waits for us each morning, in the quietest choices, when you decide whether to speak up or stay silent, when you decide whether to comfort or turn away, when you decide whether to pay the price of goodness or surrender to the ease of indifference. The world may not end tomorrow, but your soul ends a little each time you choose wrong. So I ask you now, as if you are standing at the crossroads with the characters of King's Wasteland, which voice will you follow? Will you carry the unbearable weight of good, or the unbearable emptiness of evil? The choice is not theoretical. It is yours. It is mine. It is now. And here is the cruelest revelation of all. There is no escaping the price. Whether you choose good or evil, the bill always comes. The only difference is in the currency you pay with. Good demands blood, sweat, loneliness, loss. Evil demands your reflection, your memory of who you once were, your capacity to love without suspicion. Both strip something from you, but only one leaves enough behind to rebuild. Stephen King's The Stand makes this unbearable truth visible in every character's arc. Those who followed Flag looked strong at first, fed, clothed, safe. Yet safety without conscience is a prison disguised as a banquet. They grew smaller inside themselves, shells held together by fear, living corpses who walked because obedience demanded it. Meanwhile, those who walked in the light looked weak, starved, even doomed. But in that weakness burned something unbreakable, the knowledge that they had not surrendered their humanity. That flame, small, flickering, and costly, was worth more than all the towers of Las Vegas. We, too, stand in that silent war. No plague is needed, no apocalyptic landscape. The battlefield is here, in workplaces, in schools, in families, in the quiet moments of choosing between comfort and compassion. When a colleague is humiliated and you look away. When a child cries for protection and you are too tired to respond. When injustice whispers around you and you fold your arms, telling yourself it is not your fight. Each moment is the same as those faced in King's Desert, a chance to protect your humanity, or to abandon it piece by piece. The psychology of society is a cruel mirror. It trains us to admire winners, to reward strength, to bow before efficiency. But strength without morality is the same rot that Flag promised his followers. Efficiency without compassion is the same machine that ground innocence into dust. A society that praises survival at any cost is a society already infected with its own death. And so the responsibility falls not on them, but on you, on me, on each person who dares to carry the unbearable burden of choosing right even when no one is watching. The danger is not that we will one day face an apocalypse. It is that we already live in one, silently, without noticing. An apocalypse of conscience, a slow erasure of empathy, a world where cruelty becomes ordinary and kindness becomes rare. And if we let it continue, if we let each small silence accumulate, we will find ourselves in Flag's kingdom without ever remembering how we arrived. But there is still another path. It is harder. It is lonelier. It asks for sacrifice with no promise of reward. Yet it is the only path that leaves a future worth inhabiting. King's characters who chose good were not guaranteed survival. Many did not live to see the end, but they died as themselves, uncorrupted, unbroken in spirit. That is the quiet victory, the knowledge that, even in defeat, they remained human. And now I turn to you, not as a storyteller, but as a witness. You stand at your own crossroads, perhaps not dramatic, perhaps not apocalyptic, but no less real. You have already heard the whispers of convenience, the seduction of silence, the lure of self-preservation. You have also heard the quieter, heavier voice of conscience, asking for sacrifice. One will hollow you, the other will scar you. Both will demand a price. So the question is not whether you will pay, it is what you are willing to lose. And when the day ends, when you are alone with yourself in the silence no one else can hear, will you be able to stand in that mirror and say, I remained human? That, and only that, is the price to pay for choosing between good and evil.